I'm Umbreon Libris, and welcome to Chapter 2 of my grand theory of Pokemon breeding and genetics, where I will attempt to explain everything we know so far about Pokemon reproduction and some related topics. If you haven't seen Chapter 1, where I establish the foundations that we will build on in this chapter, make sure to click here or the link in the description to watch that first. Today, we're going to cover a lot of ground to explore the genetics and reproduction of most Pokemon. And we're going to start with how, physically, how can different species interbreed? Because Pokemon can be very different physically. The classic example is Skitty and Wailord, right? Skitty is a 2-foot kitten-like Pokemon. Wailord is a 47.5-foot blue whale-like Pokemon. But they're both in the field egg group, so they can make babies together. And there's tons of other wild combinations too, like Duraludon and Applin, or Pincurchin and Cofagrigus, even Nidoking and Nidoran female, which we will talk more about later on. It is really hard to imagine copulation between Pokemon that are so different. So we take copulation out of the equation. Have you noticed how no Pokemon have visible reproductive parts? Obviously, that's because they are creatures designed for a children's game, but like I said before, we're looking for the in-world explanations. So maybe they don't have noticeable external reproductive organs because they don't actually copulate.
If we think of fish, for example, right, many species of fish, I don't think it's 100%, but many, right, will have the female release the unfertilized eggs, and then the male fish swims in that area. They're already in a courtship kind of dance many times. Sometimes they're not. And then the male will release the sperm in that same area. And there you have sexual reproduction with no actual sexual intercourse. If we go into the invertebrate world, you have sponges that release gametes to the water, and the gametes float around in the hopes that eventually they're going to bump into gametes of a different sponge and a new sponge will be born.
So both parent Pokemon could just release their gametes into the same area and the eggs get fertilized and develop outside of any body. Which could even account for why daycare and nursery staff have never seen a Pokemon lay an egg. They don't lay them the way chickens do. So the female squirts out some ova, the male squirts out some sperm that fertilizes the ova, and that develops into the Pokemon egg that we are familiar with, that we carry around with us to aid in incubation. It would have to be a pretty quick development from cell-sized gametes into a fully realized egg so that the nursery and daycare staff don't notice it happening. But considering how quickly a Magikarp turns into a Gyarados, that seems very possible. Which brings me to that weird statement by a monsieur in Coumarine City. So those egg-like things that are found at the Pokemon daycare, strictly speaking, they are not eggs. They are more like a Pokemon cradle. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Honestly, I don't know. But it makes me think that Pokemon are not developing in the eggs the way that we tend to think. One possibility is that rather than slowly developing in there, the Pokemon embryo or fetus is instead gathering energy so that it can metamorphose or evolve when it hatches. Think about how almost all Pokemon eggs look exactly the same, whether they're holding something tiny like a cutie fly or something enormous like an onyx. If Pokemon truly are all the same species, you'd expect their eggs to be pretty consistent. But the size discrepancy is significant, until you realize that that burst of light that comes out of the egg when it hatches is probably evolution energy, which allows for that really rapid change from something small and undifferentiated into whatever it is that it's developing into. Another interesting aspect of Pokemon reproduction is how different species have different ratios of males to females. Most species are roughly 50% female and 50% male, and that is true of both real animals and of Pokemon. 1-to-1 is just the most common evolutionarily stable ratio. But in Pokemon, we also have species that have 4-to-1 ratios or 8-to-1.
One thing that is really interesting in relation to these ratios is that, yes, these ratios, these different ratios exist. They're common ratios that are, I don't know, 60-40, 70-30, and things like that. They seem to be related with how the organisms evolved in terms of reproduction, yes, right? But also in childbearing, let's say. There are species in which the females exist in lower amounts, but then the males are the ones who take care of their young.
And of course, we have the 0-to-1 ratios, the Pokemon species that are entirely male, entirely female, or genderless. Entirely female species are a thing in real life because of a process called parthenogenesis,
which is a kind of sexual reproduction with itself, in a way, right? I mean, parthenogenesis can be mitotic, when it would be more like cloning. But it can also be meiotic, where actually meiosis happens. And because meiosis happens, you form a bunch of, let's call them eggs for now, right? Like egg cells with half of the chromosomes of the parent. But when those join again to form the diploid zygotes, because of meiosis, when they join again, the composition that you have can be different from that of the mother, the exact makeup. But it's only cells of that mother organism.
There are species of insects and lizards and others that basically reproduce without the involvement of a male, and so every individual in every generation is female. But in Pokemon, parthenogenesis does not necessarily come into play in the survival of all female species because of a very important and very unique quirk of Pokemon reproduction. The species of the offspring will always be that of its mother. Female Gardevoir with male Gardevoir? Ralts. Female Gardevoir with male Toxtricity? Ralts. Female Gardevoir with male Gengar? Still Ralts. Male Gardevoir with female Gourgeist? Pumpkaboo. Which means that any all-female species can easily survive by simply having their eggs fertilized by a male of any compatible species. It doesn't matter that there are no male Mandibuzz, because Mandibuzz eggs can just be fertilized by a Crobat and still hatch as a Vullaby.
The first thing that I thought of when you mentioned that characteristic was on the mitochondria. We always inherit the mitochondria of the mom, of the mother, 100%. And the mitochondria has its own genetics, has its own genome. So that genome is passed on continuously, generation after generation. It's always the mother. So that's one thing that I don't know how that would work, but it's almost as if the mitochondrial DNA would be determinant on which species it belongs to.
Huh, that's an idea. Species that are entirely male, though, that's trickier.
It's really hard to find. I sincerely don't know if they exist yet. Any example of a population that is 100% male because of the crucial role that the egg plays in reproduction. Typically, the sperm contributes only the genetic material and nothing else. And the egg has the nutrients, the egg has the mitochondria, the egg has everything else that will be necessary for that egg to succeed and thrive. So it's hard to find 100% male populations except when they're being manipulated by humans. Right, and I'm talking about all living things, I think, where we can talk about male and female.
And unlike with all female Pokemon, there is no game mechanic that provides a quick and easy explanation for all male Pokemon. And then we have genderless Pokemon.
Well, surprisingly, this exists in nature too. You do have a lot of animals that are hermaphrodites, right, that are not either male or female, so that they have both the female and male reproductive structures, whatever they are in the different animals, right? Um, and they have the capacity to produce both sperm and eggs. Like the mollusks, you have the snails that are hermaphrodites. So when they run into another snail, it always works because you always have a male and a female, right? They don't reproduce on their own, but they don't have to find a mate of the opposite sex to reproduce, right? So it always works. So I don't know if that would be considered like a third sex, hermaphrodite.
And to be fair, genderless Pokemon were called gender unknown back when they were introduced in Generation 2, suggesting they may not be entirely without sex, but only that their sex may not be fully understood by science yet. And we have no idea how genderless Pokemon reproduce. We know they don't reproduce with males or females of related species. They don't reproduce with other genderless species. They don't even reproduce with their own species.
It's hard to explain a species that cannot reproduce. It doesn't make any sense.
The only way we see them reproduce is with Ditto, but that cannot be their primary survival strategy, because genderless Pokemon in general are way more common than Ditto. Ditto's not even in every game. The same could be said of all male Pokemon too. Those at least are compatible with Pokemon of other species, but the only way to get more Pokemon of an all-male species is to breed with Ditto. And so Ditto, mix exceptions, may be the key to solving our breeding conundrum. Ditto is a bizarre Pokemon in every way. Ditto can reproduce with every other species of Pokemon that can also reproduce, and the offspring will always be that of the partner Pokemon. Even if that partner is an all-male species. Even if that partner is a genderless species. But not if that partner is another Ditto, because Ditto is an exception even to itself, and Ditto cannot reproduce with Ditto. Ditto is also well known for its ability to transform, and it's said to do that by rearranging its cellular structure to match that of its opponent. That remind you of anything? But Ditto isn't the only Pokemon that can transform. Mew is the other one that can learn it naturally, and Mew is said to contain the genetic codes of all other Pokemon. So if Ditto can transform into Mew by changing its cellular structure, and Mew has the genome of all other Pokemon, does that mean Ditto also has the genome of all other Pokemon?
If you think of how metamorphosis works, or differentiation for that matter, it would seem like a reasonable explanation, actually, that Ditto has all of the genes that exist in the Pokemon world. And then the presence of the other one allows Ditto to express those genes. It would be the environmental factor modifying which genes are expressed or not.
But we can take it further because there are more Pokemon that can transform. The particular mechanics of transform has changed a lot throughout the years, but at some point in series history, transform has been usable by Pokemon that know Assist, Copycat, Mirror Move, Me First, Metronome, Mimic, and Smeargle can learn it through Sketch too. Which to me means that all of those Pokemon are able to transform even if they don't learn it naturally. Which then also means that all of those Pokemon have the complete Pokemon genome. This then supports the theory that all Pokemon are the same species, and this species has a very high degree of phenotypic plasticity. Phenotypic plasticity is the ability of an organism to adapt by responding to their environment. Our immune system, for example, has a high degree of plasticity since it can produce antibodies for a huge range of antigens, even ones that have never existed before. But with Pokemon, and with Ditto in particular, this phenotypic plasticity applies to the entire organism. But how does this help with reproduction? Because Ditto being able to transform can't be the only thing that makes it compatible with every other species.
In reproduction, the whole genome is used, let's say, or is available to be used. It's not affected by which genes are being expressed during the life of the organism or not.
Plus, we know that when Ditto transform, they don't gain the target's sex. They don't gain the opposite sex either, they stay genderless. Although they do copy the look of the opponent, including any sex-specific characteristics. And when Ditto breed, they do pass on some of their own genetics in the form of IVs and natures, so the offspring isn't a clone of the other parent.
So Ditto, for me, is like a mythological figure, sort of like Zeus, who will have kids with whoever, whatever he decides to have kids with. Maybe that's, I don't think biology can explain that, but mythology could. The Ditto guy is like, okay, I think it's out of my league as a biologist.
But I am not a biologist, or a mythologist for that matter. I am a Pokemon theorist, and I have an idea. A purely theoretical one, but an idea nonetheless. We need a genetic system that allows Pokemon to breed in a number of possible combinations. Female Pokemon to always mother their own species, all male and genderless Pokemon to somehow survive in the wild, and for all species to breed with Ditto and be able to make offspring of their own species, but not for Ditto to breed with Ditto. It's a lot to ask for. But if all Pokemon have basically the same genome, there would have to be something that governs whether it's going to develop into a Phoebus or a Larvitar. And I think we can treat it as a single characteristic. It could be as little as a single gene, but let's pretend that it's a chromosome, where the particular combinations of forms of that chromosome is what governs the development of the Pokemon. Similar to human sex chromosomes, where you develop different sex-linked characteristics depending on the combination of sex chromosomes that you have.
The other crucial thing is to know if the other chromosome produces viable offspring or not. Thinking of the case of the humans, where the female is the homogametic sex, so it's XX, right? And the male is XY. And X0 is viable, right? But a Y0 is not, because a Y alone does not make a viable human being. And it takes only one Y, even in a case, right, we're talking about non-disjunction of the sex chromosome, and that generates individuals who are XXY. That's a male, because the Y is there making it a male, right? Or XXXXXYY, male. But X0 is a female, because the Y isn't there to make it a male.
So in humans, we have the situation where the Y chromosome sort of takes over from the X chromosome. The X chromosome by itself will develop a female, whereas the Y chromosome can't develop by itself. But the presence of a Y will always develop a male, no matter how many X's. So this is going to be a bit of a stretch, but it's the best that I've come up with. What if the chromosomes that define species in Pokemon have 3 different forms, male, female, and genderless? But the differences between these forms and how they code for development of different species is just a matter of turning certain genes on or off. So as the Pokemon develops, it can actually change what those chromosomes code for, and that can then be passed on to the next generation.
Yes, you could. It would work, mathematically speaking, right? Genetically speaking, I'm not so sure, but mathematically speaking, it could work. For you to solve problems. Okay, so then if I cross this with that, I'm going to get that because of this chromosome that exists here that determines which characteristics this offspring is, whose characteristics this offspring is going to inherit. Because that's what we're talking about, really, right? What we're talking about is just like, okay, whose species, in this case, if we're treating it as one characteristic, which species is going to be inherited, the mothers or the fathers, right?
To make things a little simpler to understand, let's call the male form M, the female form F, and the genderless form G. Which form of the chromosome is passed down is solely dependent on the gender of the individual. So a male Pokemon will always pass down an M, a female Pokemon will always pass down an F, and a genderless Pokemon will always pass down a G. The female form always takes precedence, kind of like the Y chromosome in humans. So if you have an F paired with an M, the F is the one that defines the offspring species. Ditto does not pass down any development information. It must have those chromosomes because it can transform into those species, and it did develop into a Ditto, but by some quirk of its exceptional biology, it passes down inactive chromosomes. We'll call it a 0. So whatever you breed with a Ditto, the offspring is going to be getting a 0, and then the M, F, or G from the other parent. In that case, because the 0 is basically nothing, the other chromosome can define development by itself, no matter which form it is. But two Dittos will never breed because they are both passing down 0s. And so even if their gametes are able to fertilize each other, which they should be able to do since they can breed with Pokemon of any sex, there would be no development information, and so the zygotes, the fertilized gametes, just don't grow. Alright, so that covers the genetics of any Pokemon breeding with Ditto and of male and female reproductions in the wild. But we still have not figured out how all male or genderless species are able to reproduce in the wild. And they must be able to reproduce in the wild because they are out there, they are common, they exist where Ditto don't. The only functional difference between genderless and all male Pokemon species is that male Pokemon can reproduce with females. They are sexually compatible even though the offspring is always going to be of the mother species. Genderless Pokemon can't do that. Both of them can reproduce sexually, at least with Ditto, but when paired with Pokemon of even their own species in a nursery, nothing. To me, this has been the single most difficult question to come up with an answer that makes the least bit of sense. It's possible these Pokemon are able to reproduce by themselves through some form of parthenogenesis, but then why wouldn't they be able to make eggs when they're at the nursery? There are lots of animals out there that have trouble reproducing when they're in captivity, but these Pokemon can reproduce in captivity, at least with Ditto, or with females of other species in the case of all male species. So what could it be? Males just won't expel gametes in the presence of other males? Genderless Pokemon don't expel gametes in the presence of any other Pokemon, but for some reason Ditto doesn't count? That doesn't feel like a very satisfying explanation, but it's the best one I've got. And how about the reproduction of Ditto itself? You can believe whatever you want about the origin of Ditto and whether it's a failed clone of Mew or not, but I think Ditto have to be able to reproduce. They are just too common and widespread to not be making more of themselves. An original Ditto may have come from space, or Arceus, or Mew, but nowadays they have to be reproducing. But if Ditto can't breed with other Ditto, and when Ditto breed with other species, the offspring will always be of that other species, how can they? Well, considering Ditto's exceptional nature and the incredible control they seem to have over their own genetics, I wouldn't really be surprised if they just split. Just bud off a little piece that then grows into its own Ditto. I mean, if severed starfish limbs can grow into whole starfish, Ditto can definitely do that. Which also doesn't explain why you don't see that happen in a nursery. Ah, it's you! We were raising your Pokemon and my goodness were we surprised! There was another Ditto! We don't know how it got here, but your Pokemon had it. You want it? We really need the researchers of the Pokemon world to step up their game. We can't have the nursery and daycare workers having all the power in this field. But that's it. That is the meat of this theory. Again, if you have any questions about this chapter, leave them in the comments and I'll answer what I can. If you enjoyed this exploration of genetics and reproduction in Pokemon, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss chapter 3, where I will discuss a bunch of specific cases. If you could click the like button to help promote this video, I would really appreciate that. But either way, thank you for watching. Thank you also to my patrons, especially luxury patron Ethan Saffron. I'm Umbreon Libris. I'll see you in the next chapter.